50 cents is all I've got, and everything I have." The auctioneer's voice cracked just as Jack Miller's hands started to shake. Anyone else going once Jack stood at the edge of the courthouse steps in Challis, Idaho, the late afternoon sun burning down on the back of his neck. He hadn't planned to be here this long. He hadn't planned to be here at all. But plans were a luxury he no longer had. Ben stood beside him, too quiet for a 12-year-old. That silence was what scared Jack most. Kids were supposed to fidget, complain, ask questions. Ben just watched the crowd with a seriousness that didn't belong on a child's face. Jack's wallet felt heavy in his pocket, though he knew exactly what was inside. 2 quarters. No debit card. No credit card. No safety net. The auctioneer banged the gavel. Sold. Another property gone. Another door closed. Jack exhaled slowly, trying to keep his breathing steady. The courthouse lawn buzzed with casual confidence investors, in pressed shirts locals, looking for rental flips, men who treated foreclosure auctions like grocery shopping. They chatted about square footage and resale value while Jack calculated motel nights and gas money in his head. 3 weeks. That's all he had left. 3 weeks until the money from the divorce settlement dried up completely. 3 weeks until the cheap motel on the edge of town would ask him to leave. 3 weeks until he'd have to answer questions he wasn't ready to answer, questions from social workers, from his ex-wife, from Ben. Jack glanced down at his son. Ben looked up, meeting his eyes. "It's okay, Dad," he said quietly. It wasn't. Jack had been a chemistry teacher in Denver once. A steady paycheck. A small house with a yard. Weekend science projects at the kitchen table. Then came the layoffs, the failed business venture he'd sunk his savings into, the marriage that fractured under financial stress. One bad decision had stacked on top of another until everything collapsed. The auctioneer cleared his throat. Next item. Parcel 14. Blackwood Ridge. 5 acres. 1 structure. No utilities. Severe disrepair. Opening bid $500. A few people laughed outright. Jack felt his stomach drop. Blackwood Ridge. He remembered seeing it on the list that morning. A cabin miles into the Sawtooth Mountains. No road maintenance, no power lines, no plumbing. The kind of place people joked about not bought. 400, the auctioneer tried again. Silence. 200. Nothing. The crowd's interest faded. Phones came out. Conversations resumed. The auctioneer shifted his weight, irritation creeping into his voice. $100. Jack's heart started pounding fast and loud, like it was trying to escape his chest. Ben leaned closer. "Dad?" Jack didn't answer. His eyes were locked on the clipboard in the auctioneer's hands. On the word structure. On the word land. Shelter. Ownership. Something no one could evict them from. $50, the auctioneer said, clearly annoyed now. A man in a navy blazer smirked and shook his head. "You couldn't pay me to take that place." Jack felt the moment pressing in on him, heavy and unreal. He thought of the motel's flickering lights, the thin walls, the way Ben slept with his shoes on just in case. He thought of winter coming early in Idaho, snow closing roads, questions piling up faster than answers. The auctioneer sighed. Anyone. Anyone at all. Jack didn't plan to speak. His mouth just opened. "I'll give you 50 cents. The words landed wrong, too loud, too sharp. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer squinted at him. "Sir, this is a legal auction." I know, Jack said, his voice steadier than he felt. And you don't have any other bidders? More laughter. Someone muttered, "Is this guy serious?" Jack straightened his shoulders. He felt Ben's hand grip his sleeve. "I've got 50 cents, Jack continued. "You want the property off the tax rolls. That's the point of this auction, right?" The auctioneer hesitated. He leaned toward a county official, whispered something. The official frowned, then shrugged. The pause stretched. Jack's pulse roared in his ears. Finally, the auctioneer cleared his throat. "Sold. 50 cents. Sir, see the clerk for paperwork." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the laughter came again, louder, sharper. The man in the navy blazer shook his head as Jack pulled 2 quarters from his pocket and held them out like they might vanish if he blinked. As Jack turned away, the man called after him, "That place'll kill you before winter does." Jack didn't stop walking. At the clerk's table, he signed his name with a borrowed pen. The paper trembled beneath his hand. When the clerk slid the deed across to him, it felt impossibly thin for something that heavy. Ben stared at the document. "Did we really just buy a house?" Jack crouched so they were eye level. He swallowed, choosing his words carefully. "We bought a chance." Outside the courthouse steps radiated heat. The crowd dispersed, already forgetting him. Jack tucked the folded deed into his jacket pocket and finally let himself breathe. Ben broke the silence. "Dad, where is it?" Jack glanced toward the mountains rising faintly in the distance, blue and jagged against the sky. He didn't know the road conditions. He didn't know if the cabin still stood. He didn't know if he'd just made the worst mistake of his life. But he knew this standing still would destroy them. "Blackwood Ridge," he said. "Up in the Sawtooths." Ben hesitated. Are we gonna live there?" Jack looked at his son, at the trust in his eyes, fragile and absolute. The weight of it pressed harder than any debt. 50 cents is all I've got," Jack said softly, mostly to himself. Then he met Ben's gaze and finished the thought. "And everything I have." They walked back to their truck, an aging Ford with mismatched doors and a cracked windshield. Jack slid into the driver's seat, hands resting on the wheel longer than necessary. He imagined the road ahead unpaved, uncertain, dangerous. Ben buckled his seatbelt. "Dad, yeah." Ben looked out at the mountains again. "Are we really going to do this?" Jack turned the key. The engine coughed, then caught. He pulled onto the road, the courthouse shrinking behind them. "Yeah," he said. "We are." As they drove, the peaks ahead seemed to grow taller, darker, more real. Jack didn't know what waited for them on Blackwood Ridge. He only knew they were heading somewhere no one else wanted. And that was exactly why it might save them. The road narrowed as the sun dropped behind the mountains, casting long gold-tinged shadows over the ridgeline. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter, the old Ford rattling beneath them, like it might fall apart on the spot. The GPS had gone dark 15 minutes ago, and they were now relying on a sketched map, drawn by the county clerk, on the back of the deed, complete with landmarks like turn at the bent pine and past the boulder that looks like a bear. In the passenger seat, Ben stared silently out the window, watching the trees close in. Tall pines loomed on either side of the narrow dirt road. The last sign of pavement had disappeared nearly an hour ago, along with any hope of cell service or a gas station. Jack cleared his throat. "According to the clerk, we turn left at a pine tree that got struck by lightning. You see anything charred and dramatic?" Ben shrugged. "Hard to tell. All these trees look like they've been through something." Jack almost smiled at that. The forest did have a kind of haunted beauty, like it had grown tired of visitors. The truck jolted violently as a wheel dipped into a rut. Jack braced his arm against the door to keep from slamming into it. "You okay?" he asked. Ben nodded, eyes still fixed on the trees. "We're not lost, right?" Jack hesitated. The road ahead was nothing more than twin ruts in the dirt, now overgrown and barely visible. This was past off the grid. This was somewhere people forgot about on purpose. "We're not lost, son. We're just somewhere no one else dares to go." Ben turned his head, studying Jack for a moment. Then he looked back out the window. "That's supposed to make me feel better," Jack smirked. "Did it work?" "Nope." "Fair enough." Up ahead, a blackened tree rose crookedly out of the slope, its bark scorched and split down the middle. Lightning struck pine. Jack eased the wheel, left the truck groaning in protest as it climbed the incline. Another 20 minutes passed in tense silence. They weaved around fallen branches, through ditches, and finally around a bend marked by a moss-covered boulder the size of a van. As they rounded the curve, the cabin came into view. Jack stopped the truck. So did his heart. It looked worse than he'd prepared for. The structure leaned visibly to one side, its roof sagging in the middle like a snapped spine. The porch steps were half missing the windows, boarded over with planks that had been nailed carelessly and were now warped with age. A rusted padlock hung from the front door like a dare. Ben stared at it, his voice flat. That's it. Jack killed the engine. The silence that followed felt enormous. No cars, no power lines, just wind in the trees and the occasional caw of a distant crow. They sat in the truck for another minute before Jack opened the door and stepped out. The air was sharper here, tinged with pine and old wood. It smelled like solitude. Ben followed him, backpack slung over one shoulder. He stopped a few feet from the porch, staring up at the cabin like it might collapse just from being looked at too hard. "This place is gonna kill us." "No," Jack said, reaching for the padlock. "It's gonna teach us how to live." The key from the county clerk was thick and heavy, the kind you'd expect to find in a museum, not on a keychain. It took some effort, but the lock finally snapped open with a groan that echoed through the trees. Jack pulled the door open. The smell hit them first. Dust decay. Decades of air trapped inside, waiting to rot. He stepped into the shadows and waved his hand through a shaft of sunlight from a hole in the roof. Dust motes swirled like ghosts. The main room was small and bare, just a wood-burning stove in one corner, a stone fireplace on the far wall, and an old table pushed under a boarded window. Everything was coated in grime. But the structure itself, the bones, seemed solid. The walls weren't buckling. The floors held under his weight. Ben crept in behind him. "Is it safe? It's standing." "That's a good start." They moved cautiously from room to room. The bedroom in the back was smaller than expected, but it had built-in shelves and a window facing east. A narrow ladder led up to a loft barely big enough for storage. There were no modern amenities, no running water, no electricity, not even an outhouse in sight. But it was theirs. Jack pulled open one of the boarded windows, letting in a slice of afternoon light. It cut across the room like a spotlight, revealing wood-grain walls that had held together remarkably well over the years. "Okay," Jack said, clapping his hands once. "Here's the plan: clean out the dust, clear some sleeping space, and figure out how we're not going to freeze to death tonight." Ben dropped his backpack on the floor. "What if it rains? Then we learn how to patch a roof fast." They spent the next hour sweeping, dusting, and unboarding windows to let in air. The back of the cabin revealed a narrow path leading into the woods. About 100 yards down, they found a small creek trickling through the trees, clean, fast-moving water. It wasn't much, but it was something. By nightfall, they had rolled out their sleeping bags on the main floor away from the leaks. A camping stove balanced precariously on the table, heating canned beans for dinner. Ben ate quietly, chewing slower than usual. Jack watched him from across the room, wondering what thoughts were hiding behind that tired, too-adult gaze. "You did good today," Jack said. Ben shrugged. "You think this place is gonna work?" Jack looked around the cabin. The warped walls, the holes in the roof, the fireplace he hadn't dared use yet. "I think it's gonna be a hell of a lot of work," he said honestly. "But yeah, I think it can." They sat in silence for a while, the kind only the woods could offer. No hum of traffic, no buzzing appliances, just wind, water, and distance. When Ben finally lay down, his voice drifted through the dark. "Still feels like we're lost." Jack stared at the ceiling beams above. The wood was dark with age, but it held. It had held through storms, seasons, and time. Maybe it would hold them too. "We're not lost," he said again, softer this time. "We're just somewhere no one else dares to go." He didn't know if he said it for Ben or for himself, but the words settled into the cabin like they belonged there. And in the early quiet of that first night, Jack finally believed, maybe just for a second, that they could start over. Tomorrow, they'd make a proper survey of the place. Maybe even test the water, start planning repairs. But as Jack drifted off to sleep, a thought surfaced and refused to leave. That carved name on the windowsill, TS 1967. Who was Thomas Sullivan, and why did it feel like they were following someone's trail? The morning brings light and new discoveries inside the cabin, including a hidden panel under the floorboards that leads to something far more mysterious than broken wood and old furniture. The morning came colder than Jack expected. He woke with a start, the tips of his fingers numb and the air in the cabin sharp in his lungs. Pale sunlight filtered through the newly unboarded windows, and the inside of the cabin looked less mysterious, more broken. He sat up in his sleeping bag and turned toward Ben, still bundled in layers, his breath forming small clouds with each exhale. Jack rubbed his hands together and glanced at the thermometer hanging near the fireplace. 38 degrees inside, in September. They wouldn't last long here without real heat. He stood his joints stiff from the hard floor and went outside to check the creek. The water ran fast and clear over smooth stones. He cupped some in his hand, sniffed it, then sipped cautiously. Cold, clean, no odor. That was promising. But promising wasn't certainty. Back inside, Ben had stirred his face, half hidden under his sleeping bag. "Morning," Jack said, kneeling beside the backpack. "How'd you sleep?" Ben blinked at the ceiling. Felt like camping, but without the fun part. Jack chuckled. "Fair." He dug out his small water testing kit, one of the few things he refused to leave behind when they left Denver. Chemistry had always been his thing. Still was, even if he wasn't getting paid for it anymore. At the makeshift table, Jack filled a vial from the creek sample and added the reagent. He waited. Ben sat up, fully watching. "Is that going to tell us if we'll grow extra arms?" "Hopefully it tells us we won't." The result came back clear: no harmful bacteria, no dangerous minerals. Not perfect, but better than most tap water in half the small towns Jack had lived in recently. He looked at Ben. "We've got drinkable water." Ben raised an eyebrow. "Cool. So we're officially not dying of thirst." "Yep. Just everything else to figure out." After a quick breakfast of protein bars and peanut butter, they spent the morning clearing out the rest of the cabin. Dust flew everywhere. Jack found an old broken cot in the loft along with a collapsed bookshelf. On one of the support beams, faint initials were carved, TS, followed by the year 1967. Ben spotted them first. "Same guy as the window," he said. Jack nodded, wiping dust off his sleeve. Thomas Sullivan. The name clung to the place like smoke. Whoever he was, he'd lived here once, maybe even built it. The initials were small, careful, not the kind you carve for fun. It felt deliberate, like a signature. By late afternoon, Jack had managed to patch a few holes in the roof using scavenged boards from the collapsed shed out back. Not pretty, but better than nothing. He started building a stone ring outside to cook on, gathering firewood, while Ben swept the main room again. The rhythm of the day felt good. Hard, but good. Ben called out just as Jack finished stacking the last of the kindling. "Dad, come look at this." Jack dropped the hatchet and jogged back inside. Ben was crouched in the far corner of the bedroom beside the wall. He pointed to the floor. "I stepped on it and it dipped a little, like it's loose." Jack knelt beside him and ran his fingers along the edge of the plank. Sure enough, one of the floorboards shifted slightly under pressure. He wedged the pry bar under the edge and lifted carefully. The board creaked, splintered a little, then popped free. Beneath it was a narrow, hollow space just deep enough to hide something. At first it looked empty, but as Jack reached inside, his fingers brushed paper. He pulled out a rolled bundle tied with a thin leather strap, cracked and dry with age. A second later, he found a smaller item, a folded piece of canvas wrapped around something hard. They laid everything on the table. Jack untied the strap carefully, revealing a map, drawn by hand in dark faded ink. The edges were brittle, the lines precise. Notes filled the margins, coordinates, elevations, handwritten phrases like possible secondary vein and shale break unstable. Ben leaned over his shoulder. "Is that a treasure map?" Jack didn't answer right away. He opened the canvas wrap and found a metal compass, old but still functional, along with a torn slip of paper. On it, in cramped cursive, someone had written, "The treasure isn't beneath the ground, but within it." Jack stared at the line, his thoughts racing. Thomas Sullivan had left this. The initials matched. The dates matched. And if this map was real, if these notes were real, then he might have discovered something. Not just any something. A vein of silver ore. Jack recognized the geological terms. Sullivan hadn't been guessing, he'd been surveying. Ben spoke again. "So, treasure," Jack exhaled. "Maybe. But not the kind you're thinking." He folded the map gently and tucked it back into the canvas. "This isn't a pirate's chest. This is data. Proof someone knew what was under this land." Ben tilted his head. "And they didn't tell anyone." Jack looked around the cabin, then at the carving in the loft, then at the brittle paper in his hand. "No. They told someone. Us." A silence settled in the room. Not uncomfortable, more like the kind that happens when something big shifts, even if you don't understand it yet. "If you want to survive the wilderness," Jack said, echoing something he used to tell his students, when field trips got rough at first, "you survive your own fear." Ben raised an eyebrow. "That's some kind of teacher wisdom?" Jack smiled. "It's the only kind I've got." That night they sat outside by the stone fire ring, the flames casting flickering shadows onto the trees. Above them, the stars came out one by one, brighter and closer than they ever appeared in the city. Ben poked the fire with a stick. "What if that map really leads somewhere?" Jack looked into the dark woods, the silence thick and expectant. "Then we follow it. Carefully." He didn't say the rest of what he was thinking. That someone might already be looking. That maps weren't usually hidden unless there was a reason to keep them secret. As the fire burned low, Jack felt a weight settle in his chest. Not fear, at least not entirely. More like anticipation. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were uncovering something, and somewhere out there in these mountains, a story was waiting to be finished. Tomorrow, they'd head to town. He needed answers about Thomas Sullivan, about this land, about what they might have just stumbled into. Jack looked at Ben already curled up in his sleeping bag, firelight soft on his face. They weren't lost. They were following a trail, and trails always led somewhere. The library in Stanley smelled like pine and old paper. Jack hadn't been in a place this quiet maybe since before everything fell apart. It reminded him of the science wing at the high school he used to teach in before the layoffs, before the bills started stacking, before he had to choose between groceries and gas. Ben trailed behind him, clutching the canvas-wrapped map like it might blow away if he let go. The librarian looked up as they stepped inside a woman in her early 40s. Thick glasses, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a pen tucked into her hair. She offered a polite smile. "Afternoon." Looking for something specific, Jack returned the smile. "Yeah. Actually, we're hoping to dig into some old property records. Historical stuff. From the 60s, maybe earlier." "Blackwood Ridge area," Ben added quickly. The woman's eyes sparked with interest. "Well, you've come to the right place." She led them past a row of public computers and into the back room labeled Local History Archive. Boxes lined the shelves, some neatly labeled, others scribbled on with fading marker. The woman motioned to a table. "I'm Ellie," she said. "Local history nerd, and part-time miracle worker if these boxes cooperate." Jack introduced himself, and Ben then pulled out the map and placed it carefully on the table. Ellie leaned in. "Oh, wow. That's hand-drawn. And old. Found it hidden in the floor of our cabin," Jack said. "There's a name carved into the wood. T.S. 1967. Ring any bells?" Ellie straightened slowly, her eyes narrowed with curiosity. "T.S. Thomas Sullivan, maybe?" Jack and Ben exchanged a look. "Who's that?" She disappeared for a minute and returned with a binder, thick yellowed pages stuffed with news clippings and old photos. She opened it halfway through, flipped a few pages, then stopped. There. The photo was grainy, black and white. A man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, standing beside a truck on a dirt road. Behind him, a structure that looked an awful lot like their cabin, only newer. Stronger. The caption read, "Thomas Sullivan, Geological Surveyor, 1967, Blackwood Ridge Project." Ellie tapped the photo. He worked for a small mining outfit back in the day. Spent 2 years up in those hills logging soil samples and rock cores. He filed a preliminary claim, then vanished before anything could go forward. No one's really sure why. Jack leaned closer. "Vanished, yeah," Ellie said, flipping to another clipping. "Last anyone saw of him, he was back in Stanley submitting paperwork. He was supposed to return to finalize the survey, but he never showed. People assumed he walked away. Or something worse." Ben stared at the picture, whispering under his breath. "The treasure isn't beneath the ground, but within it." Ellie looked at him, curious. "It was on a note we found with the map," Jack explained. "He left it behind, like he meant for someone else to find it later." Ellie nodded slowly. "That would fit. Sullivan was known for being quiet, a little odd. Some people say he didn't like what he found, that he was afraid of what would happen if it got into the wrong hands." Jack folded his arms. "What exactly did he find?" Ellie hesitated. "Silver, most likely. But not just raw ore. There were rumors about a secondary vein, clean, high-grade, untouched. He'd drawn up preliminary maps, but they were never filed with the Bureau. That made people suspicious. The company that hired him went bankrupt a few years later." And then, well, the trail goes cold. Ben sat down beside the binder, eyes wide. Do you think he left it for someone to finish? Ellie's gaze softened. Maybe. Or maybe he just didn't want anyone to finish it. A sudden gust of wind blew against the windows, rattling them in their frames. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something about this wasn't just old maps and buried rock. He turned back to Ellie. If he didn't file the survey, then technically, there's no claim, right? Legally, no. Ellie narrowed her eyes. But it depends what you're planning to do with that map. I'm not planning anything yet. Just trying to figure out what we stepped into. She gave him a look. Not skeptical, concerned. People still ask about Blackwood Ridge. Not often, but enough. Mostly men in suits driving trucks too clean for these roads. Jack's stomach dropped. He remembered the black SUV they'd seen idling on the roadside the morning before. They ever mention who they work for? Usually not. But a few months ago, one guy let something slip. Global Frontier Mining. They've been sniffing around the sawtooths on and off for years. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd heard of them, corporate ruthless, and known for using legal pressure and private leverage to claim mineral rights. They'd been involved in multiple land disputes across the West. Ben's voice broke through his thoughts. So, if they find out we've got the map, they'll want it, Ellie finished for him. Or they'll want you gone. Jack folded the map back into its canvas wrap. His hands were steady now, his mind spinning faster than it had in weeks. We should head back, he said. Thank you for all this. Ellie nodded. Be careful. If Sullivan walked away from all this, he probably had a reason. Jack hesitated, then asked, could I come back and maybe look at more of those records? Anytime, she said. But if you're smart, you'll burn that map and forget you ever found it. Ben's eyes widened. Jack didn't answer. They stepped out of the library into the late afternoon sun. The town of Stanley was quiet, a few cars passing, people sipping coffee on wooden benches, tourists looking for trails and fishing spots. Everything looked normal. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that someone somewhere already knew they were asking questions. As they got into the truck, Jack glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. The black SUV was back, parked across the street, engine off, windows tinted. Ben noticed too. Same one, yeah. Jack didn't start the engine right away. He watched, waited. The SUV didn't move. Finally, he turned the key and pulled onto the road. He didn't speed, didn't show panic, but his knuckles stayed white on the wheel the whole drive back. When they turned off onto the ridge trail and the forest swallowed the road behind them, Jack finally spoke. We're not alone in this. Ben looked up at him. Jack glanced at the canvas bundle in Ben's lap. Some men dig for silver, he said, voice low, others bury secrets. Ben said nothing, but as the trees closed in around them and the sun dipped behind the peaks, he gripped the map tighter in his hands, like it was something worth protecting. And maybe it was. The cabin felt different when they returned. The sun had barely set, but the woods had already swallowed the light. Jack stepped out of the truck, leaving the headlights on to pierce the growing dark. Something in the air made him pause, like a smell he couldn't name, or a sound just beneath the range of hearing. Not danger, exactly. Just something unsettled. Ben climbed out slowly, his eyes scanning the trees. He held the canvas map close to his chest, as if it might get stolen by the shadows. Jack looked at the front door. Nothing seemed disturbed, but the silence was too perfect. No birds, no rustling. Even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. As he reached for the cabin door, something shifted in the trees. A faint movement. Too quick. Too deliberate. Jack stopped cold. "Get inside," he whispered. Ben hesitated. "Dad, now!" Ben obeyed without argument, slipping through the door as Jack turned back toward the tree line. He reached behind him and gripped the hatchet he'd left wedged near the porch. "Hello," he called, voice firm but cautious. "We saw you. Don't pretend you're not there." Silence. Then finally, a voice gravelly low and surprisingly calm. "If I wanted to hurt you, you'd already be bleeding." Jack raised the hatchet just slightly. "Not a great way to introduce yourself." A man stepped out of the trees. Mid-50s, maybe older. Grizzled beard, long gray hair pulled back with a leather cord. He wore a heavy coat patched at the elbows and carried a bow slung across his back. His eyes were sharp, but not hostile. Jack kept his grip on the hatchet. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. He looked past Jack toward the cabin, then toward the woods behind him, as if taking inventory of his surroundings. "Name's Navarro," he said finally. "Carlos Navarro. I live farther north across the ridge." Jack didn't lower the hatchet. "You always sneak up on people like that?" Carlos gave a tired smile. "Only the ones that bring trouble." Ben peeked through the crack in the cabin door, watching. Jack stepped forward slightly. "We're not here to cause problems. We bought this place. Legally." "I know," Carlos said. "Saw the auction paperwork at the post office. You've been watching us, I've been watching the ridge. You just happen to be on it now." Jack exhaled slowly, trying to read the man's face. There was no aggression there, just weariness. And something else. Caution. The kind of caution that came from surviving too many close calls. "You knew Thomas Sullivan, didn't you?" Carlos's eyes sharpened. "I figured that name would come up." Jack nodded toward the cabin. "We found his map. His journal. I think he meant for someone to find it eventually." Carlos looked away for a long moment. He did. But not just anyone. Jack took that in, then lowered the hatchet just a little. "Then maybe we should talk." He invited Carlos inside. The man hesitated but followed. Ben stayed close to Jack as they sat around the table, the map spread between them. Carlos ran his fingers lightly over the worn lines, tracing them like memories. "I told him to burn this," he muttered. "Why didn't he?" "Because Sullivan was an idealist," Carlos said. "Thought if he left the truth hidden long enough, the right person would come along. Someone who wouldn't sell it off or strip the land bare." Jack leaned forward. What was he hiding from? Carlos looked up. "People like the ones in that black SUV." Ben spoke softly. "Global frontier." Carlos nodded. "They chased Sullivan hard in the end. He pulled his survey right before final submission. Said he saw what they were really after. They didn't just want silver, they wanted control. Water rights, access roads, timber, everything." "So he vanished," Jack said. Carlos nodded again. "Disappeared into the mountains. Left everything behind except this cabin. Said if the land ever passed into the right hands, maybe it could be protected. Maybe even shared. But only if that person understood what it meant to live with the land, not just on it." Jack looked down at the map again. "And you've stayed here all this time?" Carlos shrugged. "I came back from the war and didn't fit anywhere else. Sullivan gave me this place, said solitude's the only kind of peace worth chasing." Jack studied the man, his rugged hands, the calm in his voice. He wasn't a threat. He was a keeper of memory, a ghost who never left. Ben shifted beside him. Why did you come tonight? Carlos's face hardened. Because you're not alone out here. I saw tire tracks, fresh ones up on the North Pass. That's not a local trail. Jack's chest tightened. So they've already found us. Maybe. Maybe not. But they're looking. They always look. Carlos leaned in, tapping the map with one rough finger. Sullivan's claim isn't official. But the data, the notes, the samples, if you can prove the deposit's there, you can file it yourself. You'd be the first. Jack frowned. You're saying I should claim it? Carlos didn't blink. I'm saying if they do, you'll never see this place again. Silence fell. Jack thought of the debt he carried. The motel nights. The jobs that never called back. The way Ben flinched whenever they drove past a police car like someone might take him away. I didn't come here to be a land baron, Jack said. I came here to survive. Carlos stood. Then learn fast, or this place'll chew you up. He walked toward the door, then paused. Not everything hiding in these woods wants to hurt you, he said. But everything here tests you. He left without another word. That night, Jack barely slept. He lay staring at the ceiling beams, the faint glow of the fire flickering across the cabin walls. Carlos's words echoed louder than they should have. Not everything here wants to hurt you, but some things do. When the sun rose, Jack packed a bag. If the map was right, the old survey site should still be intact. If they could find it, maybe they'd find Sullivan's evidence. Something they could use to file a legitimate claim. Ben helped him load tools and water bottles. You think it's still there? He asked. Jack tightened a strap. There's one way to find out. He looked at the mountains beyond the tree line, silent, massive, unmoved. Tomorrow, they'd follow the trail. And if they were right, what they'd find wouldn't just change their future, it would uncover the truth buried beneath it. Just like Sullivan meant it to. The forest closed in tighter the farther they hiked. Jack moved steadily, keeping one eye on the terrain and the other on the map, which was now nearly soft from use. Ben followed behind him, quieter than usual, his backpack bouncing slightly with every step. The old compass swung from a loop on Jack's belt, pointing them up the ridge and deeper into the sawtooths. The elevation made the air thinner, sharper. The trail, if it could still be called that, was more instinct than path now. Half erased by time and weather, it wound through jagged switchbacks under leaning pines and around boulders streaked with lichen. Jack used a stick to probe the ground ahead. Some parts felt solid, others sank with a soft groan. We're still going the right way, right? Ben called from behind, his voice tight with effort. Jack glanced back and nodded. According to the map, the survey site should be a quarter-mile north of the rock shelf we passed. Ben gave a weak thumbs up and kept climbing. It was early afternoon when they reached the ridgeline. The trees gave way to open stone and a wide view of the valley below. Jack stopped to catch his breath, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. He looked around, trying to line the landscape up with the rough sketch on the old parchment. Then he saw it. Just below them, nestled into a shallow basin between two ridges, was a cluster of half-buried metal poles and a weathered wooden stake driven into the rock, its top wrapped with the remains of red flagging tape. This is it, Jack said more to himself than to Ben. This is the site. They scrambled down, boots sliding on loose shale. Up close, the markers looked old but untouched. One still had faint numbers etched into the metal depth readings, probably. Jack crouched beside it and pulled out his notebook. Ben walked toward what looked like a collapsed structure, maybe a shed, maybe a tool cache. It was mostly buried in rockfall and overgrowth. "Hey, Dad," he called. There's something under here. Jack joined him, kneeling to brush away dirt and branches. Beneath it, tucked between split stones, was a small metal box about the size of a lunch tin, rusted at the edges, locked. Ben looked at him. "What do you think's inside?" Jack tried the latch. It creaked but didn't budge. He reached for the hatchet and used it to gently wedge the lock loose. With one more pop, it gave. Inside were several plastic sample tubes, some labeled in faded ink, and a leather-bound field journal. The journal was stiff from cold and age but intact. Jack opened it slowly, the pages lined with tightly packed handwriting. Sullivan's. The entries were methodical dates, temperatures, coordinates, sketches of rock formations. But as they flipped further and the tone shifted, third vein confirmed higher purity than anticipated. If the company finds this, they'll bleed the ridge dry in a year. I won't be part of it. Not again. Another page. Carlos thinks I'm being paranoid. Maybe he's right. But after what happened in Montana, I know what they'll do. This time I keep it hidden. Jack turned the pages in silence, his throat tightening. Sullivan hadn't just quit the survey. He'd buried the results on purpose, because he'd seen what greed did to untouched land. "Dad," Ben said, pointing to the final page. "Read that." Jack leaned in. "To the one who finds this, if you are reading my words, you stand where I stood. Don't let the mountain be consumed. The treasure isn't what lies beneath, but what you protect above. T.S." Jack closed the journal gently, his hands still on the cover. Ben sat beside him on the rock. He trusted someone would find this. Jack nodded slowly. He didn't hide it to keep people out. He hid it to give someone else a choice. He looked around at the quiet basin. This place hadn't changed in 50 years, and it wouldn't unless someone forced it to. Ben pulled out the compass, opened it, and placed it beside the journal. "So what do we do now?" Jack stared at the map again, then back at the valley below. "If we file a claim, we own the land," he said. "We protect it. We keep them out." Ben frowned. "But won't they come after us harder?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Yes." He tucked the journal into his pack and stood. The wind kicked up dust around their boots, scattering pine needles and bits of shale. "Then why risk it?" Ben asked. Jack looked down at him and said quietly, "Because some truths deserve to be buried, but some deserve to be defended." They began the slow hike back, daylight fading fast. At the top of the ridge, Jack paused again, looking westward toward Blackwood Ridge and the cabin nestled below. From this high up, it looked like a dot in the trees, fragile, defenseless. When they reached the lower trail again, Ben stopped and pointed ahead. "Wait. Was that always there?" Jack followed his gaze. A series of tire tracks, fresh, deep cut into the soft earth. The exact trail they'd taken that morning. Jack's heart dropped. "They were here," he muttered, "while we were up there." He broke into a run, following the tracks, scanning for signs of disturbance. When the trees opened slightly, he spotted something half buried under the brush, fast food wrappers. A cigarette butt. Recent. Ben caught up, winded. "You think they were watching us?" "I think they're getting bolder," Jack said. "And I think they're done waiting." By the time they reached the cabin, the sun had vanished completely behind the ridge. The door was ajar. Jack motioned for Ben to stay back. He crept forward, every nerve on edge, hatchet in hand. Inside, things were overturned, their gear ransacked. Nothing taken, but everything touched. It wasn't theft. It was a message. Jack stood in the center of the room, breathing hard. Ben entered slowly, his eyes wide. They were looking for the map. Jack didn't answer. He walked to the wall, pulled open the panel beneath the floor, and checked the secret space. Empty. He exhaled in relief. They hadn't found the backup copy. Still, it was only a matter of time. That night, Jack sat by the fireplace, the journal in his lap, the map rolled beside him. Ben had fallen asleep early, but rest wouldn't come for Jack. Not now. They had the evidence. They had the choice. But filing the claim meant stepping into the line of fire. It meant legal battles, corporate threats, and possibly worse. It also meant protecting the land, not just for them, but for anyone who might stand here 50 years from now. He looked down at the final page of Sullivan's journal again. The treasure isn't what lies beneath, but what you protect above. Tomorrow, they'd go into town, and they'd find someone who could help them file the claim. Because if Global Frontier wanted a fight, they'd just found one. The town of Stanley felt different this time, tense, as if the wind itself had learned how to listen. Jack kept the journal and map in a locked backpack worn tight against his shoulders, like armor. Ben walked beside him, quiet, his eyes scanning every corner, every alley, every vehicle that lingered too long. The black SUV hadn't followed them into town today, but the absence felt more suspicious than reassuring. They reached the county clerk's office just before noon. A brass plaque on the front read Property and Claims Department, tarnished and scratched, but still legible. Inside, the place was quiet, except for the drone of a ceiling fan and the rhythmic tapping of an old typewriter behind the front desk. A man in his 60s looked up from the counter. Thin hair, combed, flat shirt tucked in too tight tie, crooked. He didn't smile. Just watched them approach with the tired caution of someone who's seen enough to expect the worst. Jack stepped forward. Morning. I need to file a mineral claim. Private land previously unclaimed. I've got the documents to support it. The man blinked, unimpressed. You a geologist? Used to be a chemistry teacher, Jack said. Now I'm a landowner with a hell of a good map. He pulled the leather-bound journal and map from his pack, laying them on the desk, like cards in a high-stakes game. The man his name tag read, Harvey Madsen, raised an eyebrow as he examined the papers. Thomas Sullivan. Haven't heard that name in a while. So you do know him. I knew of him, Harvey said, flipping through the journal. He made waves around here back in the 60s. Everyone thought he was sitting on a gold mine, well, silver mine technically. Then he walked away. No one ever figured out why. He didn't walk away, Jack said. He buried it, and he left this behind so someone could do what he couldn't. Harvey whistled low, tapping a finger on the page with Sullivan's field notes. These are detailed, might even hold up in court. But that's not your real problem. Jack crossed his arms. What is Global Frontier? Harvey leaned forward. They've been circling this valley like vultures. They don't need ownership. They just need access. And they've got lawyers who'd eat you for breakfast. Ben spoke for the first time. But this is ours, right? We live on the land. We found the vein. That counts for something. Harvey looked at him, and for the first time there was a flicker of sympathy in his expression. It should, son. It really should. Jack leaned on the counter. What do we need to make the claim stick? A sworn affidavit of discovery coordinates matching the survey sample evidence and a notarized land use intent. If you can get all that, I'll file it. But be ready, they'll push back. They always do. Jack nodded. We've got most of it. Give me a couple days to finish the rest. Harvey started gathering copies of the forms. You'll also need a local legal witness, someone who can attest to you being a resident claimant. That part's non-negotiable, Ellie Ben said, turning to Jack. She helped us before. Jack considered it. She knew the history. She had nothing to gain from siding with them except maybe the truth. As they turned to leave, Harvey called out, "One more thing." They looked back. "If they offer to buy you out, don't take it. They only make offers when they've already found a way to take it for free." Jack nodded once. "We're not selling." They stepped out into the sunlight, but it didn't feel warm. Jack checked the truck. No sign of tampering. Still, the unease sat heavy on his chest. They needed help, and fast. Ellie's bookstore was just off Main, tucked between a coffee shop and a bait and tackle. When Jack walked in, she looked up from her laptop and froze. "Tell me you're not dragging me into something illegal," she said. He held up the journal. "Only if telling the truth is illegal now." She blinked. "Is that Thomas Sullivan's? His actual notes?" "The claim is real, Ellie. It's not just folklore." He laid it on the counter, opened to the final page. Her eyes scanned the faded ink. She was quiet for a long time. "Then you're planning to file, aren't you?" Jack nodded. "But we need a local witness. Someone who can vouch we're not just here to flip the land." She leaned back in her chair. "You do realize what happens if they come after you, right?" "They already did," Jack said. "They broke into our cabin, went through our things." Ellie's jaw tightened. "And you still want to go through with this?" Ben stepped forward. "We're not just doing it for us. We're doing it for him, for Sullivan, and for the mountain." That stopped her. After a long pause, she stood up, walked to the back, and returned with a stamp pad and a legal notary seal. "I'll sign. But once this starts, there's no turning back." Jack nodded. "We already passed the point of no return." Back at the truck, Jack opened the glove box and tucked the signed forms safely inside. The road back to the cabin was quiet. No SUVs. No tail. But as they pulled into the clearing, they saw it. A bright orange flag staked in the ground near the creek. Ben jumped out of the truck. "What is that?" Jack followed, dread crawling up his spine. He yanked the flag free and turned it over. A laminated tag was stapled to the pole. "Pending Geological Survey, Global Frontier Exploration Division." Ben's voice cracked. "How'd they file it already?" "They didn't," Jack said grimly. "They're bluffing, trying to scare us, hoping we'll give up before the paperwork's done." He crushed the tag in his fist and threw it into the fire pit. Ben looked up at him. "What do we do now?" Jack's eyes were hard. "Now we fight. Not with fists, not with fear, with paper, with law, with truth." That night, he stayed up organizing every document they had. Sullivan's notes, Ellie's notarized witness form, Harvey's checklist. Everything was in motion. But the game had changed. This wasn't just about silver anymore. This was about the story they would leave behind. And Jack knew with chilling clarity that the people they were up against had no interest in leaving any story behind at all. Because truth doesn't just threaten power. It exposes it. And tomorrow, the world would know this mountain wasn't for sale. Rain hammered the tin roof of the cabin, drowning out every other sound, except the occasional crack of thunder that rolled over Blackwood Ridge. Jack stood near the window arms, crossed, watching muddy water carve new paths through the clearing outside. Ben was curled up in the armchair, a blanket draped over him, trying to read, but clearly too anxious to focus. They were waiting. Waiting for a call from Harvey to confirm the claim had been submitted. Waiting for Global Frontier's next move. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. Jack hated waiting. He turned from the window and stared at the map laid out on the table, its edges curled with age and damp air. Sullivan's journal sat beside it, closed but never far. Every now and then Jack would rest his hand on it, like he could absorb the man's steadiness just through contact. Ben broke the silence. "What if we're too late?" Jack didn't turn. "We're not." "You don't know that." "No," Jack admitted, "but I know what it feels like to give up too soon. We're not doing that again." Ben hesitated, then asked, "Do you think Sullivan knew it had come to this?" Jack finally looked over. "I think he knew someone would have to stand up eventually. He just didn't know if anyone would." They were still talking when headlights cut through the rain just for a second, then gone. Jack's stomach dropped. He grabbed the hatchet, motioned for Ben to stay quiet, and stepped out onto the porch. The rain soaked him instantly. He listened. Nothing. Then another flash of light, but this time not from headlights. A camera. Someone was taking pictures. Jack jumped off the porch and ran toward the tree-lined boots, slipping in the mud. He reached the edge just in time to see a figure darting through the woods, head low, moving fast. "Hey," Jack shouted, but the figure didn't stop. He chased them for 20 yards before realizing it was hopeless. The forest was too thick, too dark, and he wasn't 25 anymore. He returned to the cabin soaked and furious. Ben was at the door. "What happened?" Jack slammed the door shut. "They're watching us again. Documenting. They know we're filing." Jack didn't respond. He just grabbed a towel and wiped his face. The next morning the storm broke. Fog clung low to the trees, and the world felt washed raw. As Jack stepped outside to check the damage, he spotted something nailed to a tree at the edge of the clearing. He approached carefully. A sign. "Trespassing on this land constitutes violation of private exploratory rights. Cease and desist." At the bottom was the Global Frontier logo. Ben read it over Jack's shoulder. "Can they do that?" "No," Jack said, ripping the sign off the tree. "Not without a filed and approved claim, which they don't have." "Then why do it? To scare us?" Back inside, Jack pulled out the documents. They still had a few gaps. Coordinates needed confirmation. The affidavit needed Harvey's signature, and the ore samples had to be verified. It wasn't a mountain of work, but it had to be airtight. Global Frontier was banking on them rushing. Jack wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Ben sat down across from him. "What happens if we finish it all and they still take it?" "They can't. Not if we do it right. We don't just need to prove it's ours. We need to prove it's worth protecting." He paused. "That means we have to show the world what Sullivan saw. Not just the minerals, the cost." Ben frowned. "You mean the damage?" Jack nodded. "What it would take to extract it. The water they'd ruin. The forests they'd strip. The lives they'd change." Ben was quiet for a moment. "So we go public?" Jack looked at him carefully. "You okay with that?" "I'm not scared," Ben said. "I mean, I am. But I'd rather be scared doing the right thing than safe doing nothing." Jack felt something shift in his chest, something warm and painful at once. Pride and fear. The line between them had never been thinner. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Carlos came down from the ridge and helped them mark geological boundaries. Ellie used her local connections to get them an interview with a Boise news outlet. And Harvey reluctantly but firmly finished the paperwork and prepared the filing. On the 3rd day, Jack and Ben drove into town again, this time with 2 things in their possession: that Global Frontier didn't have: truth, and the will to use it. As they pulled into the courthouse parking lot, Jack spotted the black SUV again, this time parked openly, as if it belonged there. A man in a dark suit leaned against it, arms crossed. Jack felt the tension in Ben's shoulders. "Ignore him," Jack said. "We're not here to win a staring contest." Inside, Harvey met them with a clipboard and a nervous glance toward the windows. "You sure about this?" he asked. Jack signed the affidavit. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." They filed the claim. Legally, publicly, permanently. And as they left the courthouse, the man from the SUV stepped forward. "Mr. Murphy," he said, "my name is Dennis Kane. I represent Global Frontier." Jack didn't stop walking. Kane followed. "Let's be reasonable. We're prepared to offer a generous package, cash relocation assistance, even a stake in the company." Jack paused at the truck door and looked him dead in the eye. "If I was looking for a price," he said, "I'd still be broke." Kane's smile tightened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Jack opened the door. "Good. Then you know I'm serious." As they drove away, Ben looked over. "Do you think that's the end of it?" Jack shook his head. "No. That was just their opening move." Ben stared out the window. "So what now?" Jack glanced at the folder in the back seat, the one with Sullivan's name on it, and now his own. "Now," he said, "we make sure the world knows the mountain's not just dirt and silver. It's a promise. A promise that they'd fight to keep." It started with a drone, a faint hum overhead that Jack might have mistaken for a distant chainsaw if Ben hadn't pointed up, eyes narrowed. The tiny machine hovered just above the treetops near the cabin, silent but watching. Jack's stomach tightened as he followed its slow, calculated movement across the sky. "Is that theirs?" Ben asked. "Has to be," Jack muttered. "They want footage. Proof. A narrative they can twist." He stepped out onto the porch, eyes fixed on the drone, then raised his middle finger toward the sky. It darted away almost immediately, vanishing into the trees. Jack turned back inside. "They're escalating." "They know we filed," Ben said. "Now they're trying to scare us again." "No," Jack corrected. "Now they're trying to control the story." The news piece in Boise had aired the night before. It wasn't long, just 3 minutes during the local segment, but it showed the mountain, the cabin, the history. Ellie had spoken eloquently. Ben's voice had cracked, but he'd spoken with a kind of sincerity that no editing could dilute. And Jack had said what mattered most. What they want is silver. What we have is something worth more than that integrity. Since the segment aired, Ellie had been getting strange phone calls at the bookstore. Harvey received a cease and desist letter from Global Frontier's legal team. And this morning, Carlos had found 2 men in khakis poking around near the northern boundary of Jack's land. They weren't wearing company logos, but they didn't need to. Jack spent the afternoon triple-checking every document he had. The claim had gone through, officially registered with the state. He had the mineral rights, the land use documents, the original journal, and now media attention. But Global Frontier wasn't playing by the rules anymore. That night, Jack got a call from an unknown number. He almost didn't answer. But something told him this wasn't the kind of message you wanted left on voicemail. "Mr. Murphy," a voice said on the other end, cool and composed. "We've never officially met. My name is Evelyn Rourke. I oversee environmental acquisitions for Global Frontier. I wanted to extend one final opportunity to resolve this matter before it escalates." Jack didn't say anything. "You're a man with a child," she continued. "I understand what that means. You're not the first parent who's stood in our way. Most of them don't realize how much is at stake until it's too late." Jack's voice came out low and hard. "Lady, if you're threatening my son, I'm offering you a choice," she interrupted. "You have something we want. We have resources that can make your life very comfortable. You could be out of that cabin in 2 weeks. Debt-free. Secure." And if I say no, there was a pause on the line. "Then you'll learn what happens when good stories become inconvenient truths." The line went dead. Jack sat in silence for a long time. Ben came in from the back room. "Was that them?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, and they're done pretending." The next day, Ben and Carlos hiked back up to the original survey site. They took a drone of their own this time. Ellie had borrowed it from a friend who ran a tech shop in Ketchum. Jack filmed everything: the terrain, the old markers, the fragile water lines, the proximity to the protected pine growth. "This isn't just evidence," he said to the camera. "It's a warning." They uploaded the footage that night, attaching it to a long-form blog post Ellie helped write. She sent it out to journalists, environmental groups, and mining watchdogs. The post went viral within 48 hours. Not national viral, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough to put eyes on global frontier they didn't want. That's when the real pressure started. The cabin's power went out twice in 1 week. A dead elk was left at the edge of their property, its antlers sawed off. Carlos found strange boot prints near his camp. Ben's school files were mysteriously pulled from the local district database flagged for residency verification. Jack stood on the porch one night staring at the mountains, fists clenched. "They think they can outlast us," he said. "They think if they squeeze hard enough, we'll fold." Ben stood beside him. "So we don't fold." Jack looked at him, really looked. His son, 12 years old, who had seen too much and still stood taller every time they tried to break him. "You're not just braver than me," Jack said. "You're steadier." Ben blinked, surprised. Jack smiled. "We're going to finish this. We're going to take it all the way." That night, Ellie forwarded them an email. A senator's aide in Boise had seen the video. He wanted to schedule a meeting. The office had been looking for a way to challenge corporate overreach in public land disputes. Their story had legs. Jack printed every document again twice. They set the meeting for next week. But Jack knew getting to that meeting might be the hardest part yet. The next morning, as they loaded up the truck, Jack found a note tucked under the windshield wiper. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper typed. "You're not fighting for the land. You're fighting against time." He turned it over. Nothing else. No signature. No name. Just silence. Jack looked at Ben and Carlos, then crumpled the paper. "Let them come," he said. "We're not the ones running." Carlos put a hand on his shoulder. "Then we'd better be ready for whatever they bring next." Because this fight was no longer about who owned the mountain. It was about who deserved to stand on it and what they were willing to lose to stay. The ambush came at dusk. Jack had just returned from checking the southern boundary markers with Carlos when he noticed the front gate had been left open, a detail too small for strangers to catch, but not for him. The latch was twisted the wrong way, facing outward instead of inward. It was a message, plain and simple. "We've been here. We know your routines. We're inside." Inside the cabin, Ben was kneeling near the fire, sorting through a box of old photos Ellie had brought by that morning. He looked up, sensing the tension before Jack even said a word. "What's wrong?" Jack glanced at Carlos, then closed the door behind them. "We're not alone." Carlos moved to the window, peering through the slats. "I'll check the tree line. If someone's watching, they won't stay long once they know we're watching back." Jack nodded, but his gut was already twisting. This felt different. Not just intimidation, this was personal, calculated. He walked over to Ben, who had gone still, his fingers resting on a photo of Jack, holding him as a toddler in a hospital room. Jack sat beside him. "I need you to be brave again," he said quietly. "There's a chance things are going to escalate before they get better." Ben didn't blink. They already did. Jack smiled tightly. "That's my boy." Carlos returned 10 minutes later, soaked in sweat and breathing hard. Tracks. 3 men, 2 headed west, 1 doubled back. Jack stood. "They're probing the perimeter." Carlos didn't answer right away. Then he said, "They're wearing masks now. Black balaclavas, tactical boots. They're not pretending to be surveyors anymore." Jack ran a hand down his face. "Then this is the part where they try to break us for real." Carlos looked him in the eye. "They won't stop unless we stop them." Jack nodded, walking back to the map. The coordinates, the claims, Sullivan's journal, it all meant something. But none of it mattered if they couldn't hold the line until that meeting in Boise. 4 days. That's all they needed. But Global Frontier had a different plan. That night, the generator was sabotaged. Carlos heard the snap of a wire and was outside before the lights even died. He returned with a fistful of severed cable, jaw clenched. "They're cutting off power. Isolation tactics." The next morning, Ellie showed up in a panic. "They came to the bookstore," she said, breathless. 2 men. Never said who they were. Asked questions about you, Ben. The claim. Then they knocked over the register and left. Jack helped her inside. "You okay?" "I will be," she said, then fixed her eyes on him. "But you better make this worth it." That day, Jack made a decision. If Global Frontier wanted war, they'd get it, but on his terms. He and Carlos spent the next 24 hours rigging traps, not lethal, but loud. Tripwires connected to air horns, reflective wire strung between trees to force flashlights to bounce back, and reflective powder in the underbrush to trace footsteps. They secured the documents in a lockbox, buried beneath the porch, and backed everything up, twice one copy sent to Ellie, the other to a contact in Boise. "You don't win by being stronger," Jack muttered as he worked. "You win by being smarter." Ben looked up from helping bury the lockbox, and louder. Jack smiled. "Exactly." That night, the cabin stood quiet. No lights, just firelight and shadows. Jack lay awake, listening to the wind, waiting. At 2:13 a.m., a rock crashed through the side window. Jack was up in an instant, grabbing the emergency flashlight and his bat. Carlos was already at the door with a flare in hand. Ben sat up in the loft, frozen but silent. They moved fast. Carlos tossed the flare into the trees, flooding the forest with red light. Jack followed the sound footsteps, maybe 3 sets crashing through the underbrush. He reached the clearing just in time to catch sight of one man, broad-shouldered, moving low and fast. Jack shouted, "Get off my land!" The man didn't stop, so Jack threw the bat. It hit the ground behind him, spooking him enough to stumble, but not enough to stay. They vanished into the dark. Carlos caught up moments later. "I got one of their masks," he said, holding it up. Jack examined it. Plain black, no labels. But sewn into the inside was a company ID tag, GFE Property. Inventory 0137. Proof. Real physical proof. They returned to the cabin, breathing hard. Ben was waiting. "Was that?" "Yeah," Jack said. "They'll be back." Ben looked at the mask. "But we have something now, right evidence." Jack nodded. "It's enough to start turning this thing around." The next morning, Ellie came back with more news. A journalist from a major paper in Seattle had picked up their story. A whistleblower who used to work for Global Frontier had seen the footage and reached out anonymously, confirming internal plans to bypass claim laws through quiet intimidation and soft displacement. Jack paced the room as she spoke. "This is it," Ellie said. "The tide's turning." But Jack shook his head. "No, not yet. One more push, then we hold." He turned to Ben. "You okay to speak at the hearing?" Ben blinked. "Me? What am I supposed to say?" "Just the truth," Jack said. "The truth from you means more than 1,000 angry words from me." Ben thought for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay." Carlos leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're not just building a case. You're building a line they can't cross." Jack looked out the window, then back at them. "No," he said. "We're building something that'll outlast them. Because this was no longer a fight for land. It was a fight for meaning, for legacy. And for once, they weren't fighting alone." The morning they left for Boise, the sky was the color of old nickel, thick with the kind of clouds that threatened snow before November even had the nerve to arrive. Jack double-checked the truck 3 times. Documents, backup drives, portable chargers, water snacks for Ben. Everything had to be perfect. Everything had to hold. Carlos strapped the last duffel bag into the back and gave a sharp nod. 3-hour drive. We don't stop. If we see anything tailing us, we pull into a public space, gas station, diner, doesn't matter. Keep eyes on. Jack looked down at Ben, who was quiet but steady. His hands fidgeted with the zipper of his jacket, but his eyes were clear. Focused. "You sure you want to do this?" Jack asked again, voice low. Ben gave a small smile. "If I don't, they'll just keep saying whatever they want. Someone needs to say the truth." Jack squeezed his shoulder, then opened the truck door. "That someone is you, kiddo." Ellie stood on the porch, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. She handed Jack a manila folder with new printed affidavits just in case. "Don't let them twist the narrative. And don't let them turn you into the villain." Jack offered a tired smile. "That ship sailed." The drive was tense from the start. They spotted a gray SUV in their rear view half an hour outside of town. It kept its distance, never getting too close, never falling too far behind. Jack didn't say anything at first. Neither did Carlos. But they both saw it. At a rest stop outside Mountain Home, they finally lost it, cutting across a muddy construction access road that led them back onto the freeway from a separate on-ramp. By the time they reached Boise city limits, the tension had climbed like a fever. The state building was tall, unimpressive, bureaucratic. They parked underground, triple-checking the lock on the truck. Inside, the hearing chamber looked more like a high school gymnasium than a courtroom. Fluorescent lights, folding chairs, a podium with a state seal. But the audience was real. Local reporters, environmental advocates, a few familiar faces from Stanley. Even Harvey was there, jacket-pressed expression unreadable. Jack looked around and exhaled slowly. "Let's do this." The panel of commissioners sat in a row behind a long desk, microphones in front of them. At the center was Commissioner Rebecca Lang, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone. She called the hearing to order at 10:01 a.m. First up was Global Frontier. A suit named Nolan Graves presented their side, confident, rehearsed, hollow. He claimed the company had a historical interest in the region's survey rights, preliminary environmental approval. Their tone was smooth, dismissive. They didn't mention the threats, or the drones, or the break-ins. Then Jack stepped up. He wasn't a natural speaker, but he didn't try to be. He just told the truth. About Sullivan, about the journal, about the buried findings, and what Sullivan had hoped someone else would protect. He told them about the mine markers, the water tests, the damage extraction would do to the region. But the room went silent when Ben walked to the microphone. He looked smaller than he had all trip standing there alone in front of rows of adults, news cameras in the back. Jack's heart clenched. Ben cleared his throat. "My name's Ben Murphy. I live up near Blackwood Ridge with my dad. We didn't always live there. We used to have a house in Meridian, a normal house. Then things went bad and we moved. At first it sucked. A few chuckles. Ben pushed on. But now, I think that mountain saved us. Because it made us pay attention. It made us see things. We learned how to live with less, how to fix things, how to listen." He paused. "And now someone wants to take that mountain. Not because they need it, but because they think they can." Jack swallowed hard. "They think we're just a poor family who won't fight back." Ben continued, voice steadier now. "But they're wrong. We're not trying to stop progress. We're just trying to protect what already works." He looked directly at Commissioner Lang. "You asked why this land matters. It's not because it has silver. It's because it has purpose. And we won't sell it. We won't leave. And we won't be scared quiet." The silence afterward was thick enough to break. Lang leaned forward. "Thank you, Ben." The hearing moved into deliberation. As the commissioners retreated behind closed doors, Jack and Ben stepped outside for air. Carlos joined them on the steps, lighting a cigarette unbothered by the security camera overhead. "That kid just gutted an entire corporation with one speech," he said. Jack chuckled, but it was tight. "Now we wait." But waiting wasn't in Global Frontier's playbook. 10 minutes later, Evelyn Rourke appeared. Flanked by 2 lawyers, she walked directly toward Jack as if the cameras didn't matter. Her voice was calm but sharpened like glass. "You got your moment," she said. "I hope it was worth it." Jack didn't flinch. "We'll find out when the vote comes back." "You don't understand," she said. "This was never about the vote. It's about how far we're willing to go after it." Ben stepped forward. "You mean like breaking into our house, threatening our friends?" Rourke tilted her head slightly. "All things that can be argued as perception, not fact." Jack narrowed his eyes. "We've got footage, statements, a damn trail of intimidation you couldn't bury with all the silver on that ridge." Rourke's smile didn't falter. "That's cute." Then she stepped closer, voice barely audible. "If you win this, the gloves come off. No more PR, no more games. And no one will care if you end up crushed under the weight of your own principles." Jack leaned in, matching her tone. "That's the difference between you and me. I can live with that." Rourke stepped back, signaled to her team, and walked away without another word. At 3:47 p.m., the commissioners returned. Lang cleared her throat and adjusted her microphone. After reviewing the evidence, testimony, and environmental considerations, she said, "We have decided to uphold the Murphy claim as legitimate and grant sole development rights to the claimant." Cheers erupted behind them. Ben exhaled. Carlos whooped. Jack just closed his eyes, relief crashing over him like a storm tide. But Lang wasn't done. "We are also referring all pending documentation of threats, trespassing, and potential corporate misconduct to the State Attorney General's office for investigation." Gasps now. Rourke was gone before the applause ended. Jack stood stunned, not because they won, but because the fight just changed shape again. Dad Ben whispered, tugging his sleeve. Jack looked down. Ben said the words that echoed like a promise across the crowded room. We didn't win everything, but we won enough to keep standing. Jack nodded, and now they had to decide what came next. Snow came early that year. By mid-November, Blackwood Ridge was blanketed in white. The cabin looked different now, no longer just a place to survive, but a place to belong. Smoke curled from the chimney. The wind still howled through the pines, but it felt less like a threat and more like a lullaby from the mountain itself. Jack stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, staring out at the endless quiet. Inside, Ben was working on a school project, his desk a mix of maps, books, and a half-built diorama of the ridge. The boy had grown quieter since Boise. Not withdrawn, just thoughtful, like his brain was always one step ahead of his words. Carlos had gone back to his trailer, promising to return once the snow thawed. Ellie still dropped by every few days, bringing groceries and local news. The town had changed toward them too slowly, but noticeably. No longer wary, curious, supportive. Some even said thank you. But peace never arrived without a cost. The AG's investigation into Global Frontier made headlines statewide. While no arrests had been made yet, public pressure had forced the company to back off for now. Evelyn Rourke had vanished from the news cycle, replaced by spokespeople with careful language and no eyes. Jack didn't trust the silence, but for once he wasn't afraid of it. He heard the door creak behind him. Ben stepped outside, jacket zipped up, his breath fogging in the cold. "You're gonna freeze out here." Jack smiled, sipping the coffee. "Nah, I've got heat in the bones." Ben joined him at the railing. They stood together for a while, watching the snow fall between the trees. "Ellie dropped off the mail," Ben said. "You got a letter from Boise?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Good news or bad?" Ben shrugged. "Looks boring." Jack took the envelope inside, peeled it open. It was from the commissioner's office, a notice that the Murphy claim had been added to the state registry of historically protected environmental and cultural sites. Not only was their claim validated, it was now under additional protections. Ben read over his shoulder. "That's good, right?" Jack nodded. "It means they can't touch it without tripping every legal wire in the book." Ben leaned against the table. "So what now?" Jack folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope. "Now," he said. "Now we live." He walked to the fireplace and threw another log on. Sparks popped flame, growing brighter. The sound filled the silence between them. "You know," Jack said after a moment, "I used to think that protecting something meant holding onto it as tight as possible. Controlling every outcome. Blocking every risk." Ben tilted his head. "And now I think it means teaching others how to care about it too. Letting it breathe. Letting it be what it's meant to be." Ben didn't say anything right away. "Then like Sullivan did." "Exactly." Later that day, they hiked up the ridge together, their boots crunching through fresh powder. They brought a wooden marker Jack had carved, simple, with a name etched into the grain. Thomas Sullivan, geologist, steward, witness. They planted it near the collapsed entrance of the old mine shaft, a place Sullivan had once written about, with reverence and guilt. The snow was thick, but the wood stood strong. Jack stepped back and looked down at the marker. He could have been rich, he said, but he chose to be right. Ben nodded. "And now we finish what he started." Jack put a hand on Ben's shoulder. "No, we continue it. This doesn't end with us. It begins with us." On the hike back, they passed the clearing where Jack had once seen that first orange flag Global frontiers, not so subtle warning. The flag was long gone now. But the scar in the earth remained a line carved by greed, healed slowly by snow and silence. By the time they returned to the cabin, the sun was dipping behind the trees. The light turned golden soft. It caught on the frost along the porch railing, painting the world in fire and ice. Ben paused at the door. Dad, yeah. Do you ever wish it hadn't happened, us losing the house? Mom leaving? All of it. Jack turned slowly, surprised by the question. His breath caught in the cold. Sometimes he said honestly, I wish you didn't have to grow up so fast. I wish we didn't have to fight so hard. But if we hadn't come here, we wouldn't be us, not like this. Ben smiled. I like us. Jack ruffled his hair. Me too. They went inside, shutting the cold behind them. That night, Jack opened Sullivan's journal one last time. He flipped to the final page, the one with the sentence that had haunted and guided him from the beginning. The mountain's wealth is not beneath it. It is what it teaches us above. He stared at the words for a long time. Then he closed the book, locked it in the drawer beside the bed. Outside, the wind howled again, but this time it sounded less like a warning and more like a promise. Because some stories aren't meant to end with a bang or a blaze. Some stories end with quiet endurance, with people who stay, with land that breathes, with truth that refuses to be buried, and with a boy and his father who didn't just survive the mountain. They became part of it, and it in turn became part of them.